At least 18 states have passed laws banning transgender women or girls from school sports. This week, the Boston Marathon made a very different move. Organizers announced that runners will have the option to register as gender non-binary for next year's race. Joining us now to discuss this move is Jake Fedorowski, creator of the Guide to Non-Binary Inclusion in Running. Jake, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
First of all, Jake, may I ask, what pronouns do you use?
Yeah, my pronouns are they and them.
Would you explain for people who may be new to this topic, to this concept, what that means to you, to use they, them as your pronouns?
Sure. So it goes back to this separation of what is the sex assigned at birth and what is the gender identity of an individual. So my gender identity is non-binary, and that for me means that I am identifying outside of the gender binary of men and women. So there are elements of both genders that I will, incorporate into my identity, but I'm not identifying as a man or as a woman. I'm kind of completely outside of that gender binary.
What has that meant for you in terms of your involvement in running, dealing with people who are cisgender, like me, cisgender meaning their gender identity matches their assigned sex at birth, dealing with people who are cisgender and don't understand what it means to be transgender or gender non-binary? How has that been for you?
Yeah, it's been really challenging. I have, done a lot of educating of my fellow runners and those in the community when and where I can. It's really challenging, specifically when I'm registering for races, and that's where this news is so exciting. I have begun to register for these, or at the beginning when I was registering for races, I was having to choose between a men's division or a women's division. And so how, as a non-binary person who identifies outside of those two buckets, am I being, folded into this process, right? And what sort of space is being created for me? That's where this importance of creating space for non-binary individuals kind of comes into the equation. And with that comes a lot of pushback from people who maybe don't, affirm the non-binary gender identity. And for those who, might need a little bit more education or information or resources, that's kind of where, my advocacy work comes into play.
Talk about what it will mean for runners like yourself to have runs like the Boston Marathon begin to allow a space for non-binary runners to be affirmed and to basically be noticed and included in the run. I understand that there's still some work to do in terms of figuring out qualifying times, money for crossing the finish line first. Like, it's not quite on par with people who run in the men's and women's division, right?
Correct, yeah. So stepping into this work brings a level of responsibility to these races, because you're now creating a space where you're inviting non-binary folks into the event. And by doing that, you want to make sure that it's a space that celebrates those identities, that is, basically treating them the same or, equally as the men participants, the women participants. And so how is gender at play in your event, right? Do you have gendered restrooms? Are you giving out apparel that men's shirts or women's shirts? Are you using gendered language? Is your announcer at the event saying, "Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2023 so-and-so marathon," right? There are so many areas where gender is at play, and we as a society, we as an industry have to start to pull back that layer of gender and start to think about how can we be more inclusive. And this goes into, as you were saying, the awards and prize money, all those things that we think about for the men's and women's divisions need to be addressed and be made available for those in the non-binary division.
I know I got to let you go in a minute, but I wonder if you could help me kind of educate some folks, again, who are very new to this, especially people who don't run. I am not a runner. If I tried to do a marathon, my whole focus would not be on, frankly, the identities of anyone around me. It would be on trying not to die. So for people who are new to this, especially in the running community, give me an example of something that they might bear in mind, consider, think about, consider doing differently if they are going to engage in issues of gender more thoughtfully, perhaps for the first time. Is there like a common landmine that you would recommend they not step on?
Yeah, what I try to push for folks is that as you start to do this work, the biggest thing I can recommend, I mean, there are two things I can recommend. One is to educate yourself, right? Find resources such as my guide to non-binary inclusion in running, or Google. Find those ways that you can start to educate yourself on the experience of those who may not identify as men and women. But in addition, to also find those ways to kind of check yourself and start to realize the moments in which you are making assumptions, right? We think of runners all the time and like, oh, we see a runner with a ponytail, or we see a runner with a pink shirt or pink shoes, so it must be a woman, right? Or we see a runner who's got really short buzzed hair and, the t-shirt and maybe some longer shorts. Oh, that's a man.
Right.
Is that really a man? Is that really a woman? How do you know? And what assumptions are you making just on, the way, or just by a way that someone is, presenting themselves at that event? So the more that we can do to kind of refrain from making those assumptions, the better.
Jake Fedorowski, author of The Guide to Non-Binary Inclusion in Running. Thanks for making time for us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.